Hi everyone, and welcome to our GCS Connect Leaders Series, another episode. We've got Ross Humphrey with us today. He is the Head of Technology from one of our clients, Validus. Great to have him here. Just to quickly introduce GCS and the Leaders Series, GCS is a technology recruiter. We work in Europe and the USA. And what we try to do is create a network, as it were, of expert talent and innovative companies, of which Validus definitely is one. And the Leader Series is really a chance for us to speak to those people within that network and understand and go into more depth about what they're thinking about business, about technology, and about obviously the kind of current economic and lockdown situation. So Ross, thanks for joining us today. Ross has got 9 years. He's a meteoric rise, kind of moving up the chain. So watch this man fly. He's got a team of 15 developers that he works with, developing products within the Validus environment. And yeah, it's great to have you on board, Ross. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Very good.
Obviously, I can introduce yourself, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and what you're really kind of focused on within your role.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, like you said, I'm Ross. I'm the tech lead at Validus. So Validus are a market risk firm. We've been going 11 years now. I've been here for one of those. So I joined in lockdown 1 last year. So definitely an interesting time to join an organization. On the tech side of things, we support our business from, I guess 2 different perspectives. One is on the internal trade booking system side of things. And then on the other side, we have a kind of suite of client-facing products that we build out. So my team is kind of in charge of looking after all of these products and the infrastructure that they sit on as well.
Fantastic. And you just mentioned there, obviously, I mean, one of the questions we always have is what significant business challenges do you have to overcome? But, joining as a manager, we spoke to a guy, Matt from Elsevier, a few weeks ago, but joining as a manager during lockdown, so becoming the leader, but a remote leader, must be quite tough. It's quite a big challenge to overcome.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting one. Hopefully one I only do once in my career, hopefully. I think, the kind of obvious challenges that any leader faces, COVID or no COVID, is like creating those kind of personal relationships with people, right?
Sure.
And in this kind of situation, that is slightly more tricky to do. I think that something about, being in the same room as someone else helps build those kind of physical relationships, right? And collaborating on ideas is sometimes a little bit more difficult. You can't just pull up a whiteboard and start kind of slinging stuff out there. So I think from that perspective, building the relationships and collaborating on ideas is definitely a difficult challenge to come into, during COVID times. So I think we kind of came up with some ways around that. We were doing Zoom calls and Teams meetings, but they only go so far. I think one of the main overall challenges as well, right, is not to do with leadership per se, and I think it's been touched on recently, by the guy who runs Goldman's as well, right? Is mentoring the juniors is a lot harder in this kind of situation that we're in. It is possible, and I think we have done a good job of it. I think some of the critique that has come out in the last couple of days has been around not having people next to each other. I think what you need to do as a leader is just put kind of better frameworks in place, right? And have people who are mentoring who are very good at that role. I think we found people on our team that are incredible at that, and when we've had new junior people join, they mentor those kind of younger members of the team, and I think they've picked up stuff that they would have picked up in an office environment anyway, right? I think there was a bit of kind of teething troubles with it, the first kind of couple of people that we were kind of trying it with, but I think now we've got a very good framework in place. When a new person comes on board, they feel welcome, they have everything they need to kind of get going. So
yeah, that's right. And I guess and then technology is also caught up as well, hasn't it? I think that people are starting to understand different ways of working and using kind of messaging tools and these types of things, particularly on the development side, to build those communications in different ways.
Yeah, I think so. And, I think in the tech space in particular, we've always kind of used these tools to do various pieces of communication. If I look at a tool like Slack, for example, right?
Yeah.
The teams that I've been on, not just, where I am now, but in previous roles, right, we've used Slack or some variant of to do communication pretty much as long as I can remember, right? And I think that the transition for a team like ours in the tech space has been somewhat easier than maybe a traditional team who doesn't use those tools, right, to do that stuff day in, day out. So I think from a technology perspective, guys on tech teams have generally found it easier, I think, right, overall, than some of the other teams across the industry, right?
The innovators, shouldn't you, really, as opposed to the stick in the mud, because you obviously know how it's put together and know how it works, and obviously in that online world already. I'm quite interested. One of the things I've really found when I've taken on more senior people is, you come from a big business like JP Morgan, you understand, you've worked in this environment. I've always felt that when I've joined other businesses, that sometimes people forget that you're new, that it's, I'm not saying that's happened with Validus, but you kind of come on, and at GCS, I always try to tell people that are new, that are senior, we do understand that you're new, so you don't understand this world. How did that come from? Because I'm quite kind of interested in coming from that really big corporate to something smaller, but how did that change? How did it feel for you?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting question. So I think you kind of have to go into it with the right mindset, right? That you might not necessarily have all of the resources that you had, in other places, whether that's people, money, even the weight of the name carries a lot as well, right? When you're trying to do stuff. So I think from that perspective, it's about framing the role in the right way before you come in. I think to kind of transition successfully from one to the other, I think you need to kind of take the learnings from a big organization, all the kind of really good bits, the best bits, and then start applying them in the kind of new, smaller organization. And I think from a technology point of view, that's somewhat easier to do, right, than some other, some other roles across, banking in particular, right? So if you look at, someone in a trading position, for example, moving from a big investment bank into, a small firm like ours, the responsibilities are obviously very different, but the platforms that you have access to are very different, and the resources you have access to. But in technology, I think that it's almost it's
more of a leveler,
like,
isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite democratic, right? Like like the industry at large is very accommodating to the big players and also the small ones. And I think I didn't quite grasp before I came to Validus like how valuable the relationships you hold with third parties are, right? So for us, we have very good relationships with AWS. We use great partners in Robura, and I think that what that allows us to do is talk to them the same way that a big company would talk to to an AWS or a Robura as well. So I think from that perspective, it's definitely helped us scale some of our ambitions a lot quicker. Having those relationships. But yeah, I think truthfully, I think being a small company, quote unquote, is not a limiter in technology, like other industries.
It's not really a limiter in any area, is it? It's just that we, as a recruiter, I always find that there are certain people that exist well within big companies, and it's something that we look at, when we're out filling a role. You've worked for a big company, this is a small company, how do you feel about this? And it's all relative, isn't it? Small as opposed to JP Morgan, most things are small, right? But that kind of links me into my next question, really, which is around delivering that software product, because if you've started now, you've settled, and obviously now you have to do your job, is deliver like great software, which you do. What do you think are the benefits and therefore the challenges of that in this remote environment? I'm
Yeah,
sure
so
obviously building your team is one of them, but obviously you've got that now. So how do you go about it?
yeah, I think that there's probably two good answers to that question, splitting it into two. So one is on delivery, and then one is on the kind of remote environment. I think broadly speaking, technology itself is full of these kind of attractive like propositions, right? Like these kind of if you look at the big companies, like to take a Salesforce, for example, right?
Yeah.
That can solve pretty much every business problem you have, nearly, right? And obviously you have to know, and this I think is like the artistic part of being a tech leader, right? Is that you have to know when to strike, right? I guess that's probably the word I would use on a technology, and when not to do that. And I think the delivery of a software product is kind of being focused, right? That's how you do it successfully. It's looking across the market and looking at the temptation, because there's a lot of it, right? It's you can be a bit like a kid in a candy shop, right? Oh, look at that new technology, look at that. You get a bit of neighborhood envy as well, I think, from looking at your competitors. If you look at finance in particular, it's rife, right? You look at your competitor and they're doing machine learning, and you think, oh, I should be doing machine learning, and you're almost looking for the use case, right? And I think that's happening a lot at the moment with another technology, which is blockchain, right? The big players, the JP Morgans, the Goldmans, are all doing it as some variant of that technology. And it's easy sometimes to get caught up in the hype, right? And sometimes the successful delivery of a product is actually learning not to get distracted by all of these sexy technologies, right, that exist out there.
Interestingly, we spoke to Salesforce, actually. We had a previous leader series with Nora Cullen, who was one of the product managers there, and she very much spoke to that as trying to focus in on what people, yes, we can do pretty much anything, but trying to focus in on what you actually are going to use, and what can we help you to use that's useful to you, rather than us blowing your mind with every single part of our product. I guess that's similar to what you're saying, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's always a time and a place for everything. When it comes to technology, if you look back in history, so to speak, right, there was a time and place for the iPhone to be created, right? And and Apple took that opportunity. In the machine learning space, I think at the moment it's unclear what all of the use cases for that are, but there definitely are some, right? If you look at a Tesla, for example, they've used it to build the kind of automated cars, and I think that as someone who's in charge of a number of people, and therefore like the portfolio of of a company's technology in that respect, you kind of have to know when the timing is right, and it is difficult. I had a conversation recently, and it was around blockchain, and it was almost the point I made was, maybe we'll be the ones laughing if we don't do this, right? There might be a company that's investing millions of dollars into blockchain, and the financial services industry runs out of steam when it comes to blockchain, and it never gets adopted, and we didn't do it right now, and we're the ones that have won off the back of that. Conversely, it may be that this technology has a quick turnaround, and we lose, right? And that's the risk you have to take. And I think that's technology in general. The people
that's interesting. You go back to it as that artistic element of it. The kind of more as a sport or a game, when you're choosing, what to focus on, what to develop, and it's like you said, it's very much within your remit to choose that, isn't it? And you're the guy that's got to kind of come up with the calls, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think if we go back to the kind of original question around kind of remote working, right? I think one of the big bets that a lot of companies made, in the recent times, is on cloud, right? Like they looked at the AWS offerings and the Azures of the world and went, okay, I don't want to have a physical data center anymore. This thing's costing me a lot of money. I'm not very good at managing it, as a firm of this size. Maybe we should look at this offering. And I think the people that did that at the time, and Validus was one of those that adopted AWS early, if you will, are the ones that are now winning out over the physical data centers. I think the pandemic has made a pretty obvious point of physical locations don't really mean that much, right? So if you can get away with not having them, whether that's office space, server racks in a data center, directly owning that, it gives you a bit more power. And I think that, not in Validus and not in any of my previous places, but, being able to turn down your data center, I think is definitely a powerful thing, right? Where companies in the last year have been tight for money, being able to say, actually, if we can turn this server off, like that's the difference between our survival and not. I think, that is a very powerful thing to have in your infrastructure. So from that respect,
more lean,
yeah,
actually,
I think it's a very powerful offering. And I think, there's obviously other technologies that support software delivery that are very important. I think one of those for us when I joined, was putting automation around our processes, right? To be completely transparent, when I arrived, we didn't have like CI/CD pipelines, right? Very what I would call basic, things that need to be put in place. We now have those, but what that allows you to do is almost ensure that your kind of team's processes not only documented, but you've almost got the answers to your questions before you're asking them. So like an example of this would be, someone goes, into our Slack channel and they say, can I deploy to production like right now? And then they go in there and they can see that, okay, actually this person is currently doing a deployment. Once that deployment's done, it will notify, and then they're good to go, right? So you end up having this kind of like implicit communication between people that doesn't require any work. And I think that's helped us a lot. We've gone from doing releases whenever the hell we want to doing releases every week to doing them multiple times a day, right? So we've definitely been able to kind of evolve over the course of this year period.
And that's similar to something like the vaccine, isn't it? I think, the remote environment, the benefits of it, we talked about the challenges many times, but the benefits of it is that people have had to think about, how do we do this now? The vaccine is a great example, right? I know that's obviously nothing to do with either of us, but if you actually look at how they have developed the vaccine, never before have anyone developed a vaccine as quickly as this, because they had to. So they had to work out what what was taking up time, where they could cut red tape, where they could move forward quickly. And that sounds very similar to what you're saying. It's like, these are things that we could do to make this go out quicker.
Yeah, and I think the vaccine side of things is actually a really good example. And I think looking back in history, necessity is always the lead driver of innovation. I have conversations regularly with different people. The people that talk about innovative, like ideas that are disruptive, right? And I think that the term disruptive innovation is a hack, right? Because no innovation truly is disruptive, right? You could class the vaccine, that we're talking about as a disruptive, piece of innovation, but actually it's not, because disruption is chaos, right? And actually what it's doing is allowing us to have order. And I think if you're looking at innovation, trying to upend everything in the world, you're never going to get to the right answer. All of the biggest innovations that have ever been made, going back hundreds of years, are ones that help people, right? They're enablers. They're not disruptive in any way.
Go all the way back to fire, Ross. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly,
Let's start right from the start, shall we?
That
this podcast could go on for hours now. Great stuff. And you obviously talked there about that, bringing the pipeline in and making these changes, and that's what you have to do as a leader. Like you said, you have to take these calls. This is how we're going to do it. How has it affected you? Obviously, you've worked in big tech teams where you've been sat with your people and this is what we're going to do. How has it affected the way you present these changes, or has it not affected the way? Have you done it in the same way?
Yeah. So with regards to kind of the technology side of things, there's some stuff where you have to kind of say, this is how we're going to do stuff. And I think when you come into a team, you don't want to be that guy coming in with the iron fist, right, saying this is bad, we've got to change this, why are you doing this, right? I think that I've been there, not being that guy, but I've definitely been on the receiving end of that. And it's, you think to yourself, well, from a leadership perspective, am I going to follow this guy? No, he's just telling me what to do, right? And actually, I have no say in the process. therefore, like, I'm going to do my work as a professional guy, obviously, right? I'm going to do what he says, but I don't have the ability to bring anything to the table. And I think what we did here, at Validus when I joined, it was, okay, this thing isn't ideal. How do you want to, how do you want to solve this problem? And actually, if you look at the CI/CD pipeline side of things, that's a really good example. I basically said I wanted it in some way, shape, or form, but didn't dictate how or what technologies, or the implementation of that. And I think what that has allowed everyone in the team to do is get bought into that process, right, overall. And where there were some questions around how we should do stuff, obviously I can give that guidance, but I think it's important for people to feel like they're part of that change, right? And making the decisions about what they want to change, and where we've got to a limit or a point where we're kind of contesting whether we want to do any more, I'm leaving that decision to the guys to make that decision.
I think that's a big thing in leadership. I think I've talked quite a lot about more trust. In the last 12 months, I think leaders have developed more trust in their teams, and I think they've developed more in all industries, more ways of working collaboratively, because you have more trust. I think there was a lot of command and control before, maybe from me. I mean, it might not be from anyone else, but from me, there's a lot of command and control. This is the way we're going to do things. Whereas now, I think, and talking to the leaders on the podcast, there's a lot more. Need to work with the people around me. I respect their views. I know how hard they work, and I think they've got great things to input. Would you find that yourself?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to one of the challenges, I think, of the kind of like you have to overcome, right? And I think one of them is having trust, right? And I'm a pretty trusting guy when it comes to people on my team, and I think it comes down to who's in the team, right? I think one of the interesting things for me, around COVID is that, I kind of read some disappointing things, right, when it comes to productivity, when it comes to working from home, for example. So, for me, I joined Validus during lockdown. I haven't known it any other way, right? So I have nothing to maybe compare it against, but everyone on this team, to me, I don't feel like we're going to go back to an office in the near future and suddenly the productivity level is going to jump tenfold. No. I think that's definitely not going to happen, right? I think all of the people on this team have shown that they are professionals, right? And when you're a professional person, whether you're in an office or not, it doesn't make a difference, right? And I think the productivity levels that I've seen on this team in particular, far outstrip some of the ones I've been on in the past, where I definitely have been in an office 5 days a week. So, from that perspective, I think if you hire the right people that do their job anyway, where they don't need to be watched to do it, I think that, you get the best out of people in this environment. And I think, you have to question yourself as a leader, like, if people are working from home and they're not productive, like, why is that? Is it that, they're doing childcare, for example? Is it that, actually they need to be watched to do their job? And that in itself is probably a problem, right? So, it's not stuff that's solved necessarily by an office environment. You can solve those problems anyway, right? So on the childcare front,
having the right
you can give people space. And when it comes to people having to be watched to do their job, I mean, that to me is just crazy, right? I would never have someone like that in my team. So I think, Validus has done an amazing job at it. I think across the board, not just in my team. So it's going to be interesting.
I think most companies have. What other advice would you give to business leaders at the moment if they're developing software products? What other things would you say, or if you talk through a few things, what are the key pieces of advice you would have for them?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of touched on the main points already, and it's hiring good people and trusting them to make the right choices. So, the CI/CD pipeline, you want something, but ultimately, these people that you're working with day in, day out, they're the ones that are using the products every day, right? So, these are the people that are having to maintain the software, use these processes. So, like, who am I to dictate to them, like, how it's going to work? And I think, people generally work it out themselves. And, I found in my career, earlier on in my career, that when I was given that, that responsibility, it was very empowering, and often, like, you end up learning a lot more as well. along the process. So that's how I kind of want my team to feel as well. And I think that, you know, it is a challenge personally, you know, as a person in charge, you are somewhat giving up that responsibility, right, to other people. And it is, you know, you need to have confidence that these people are going to do those things, right, and do them in the right way. But why would you hire someone that you don't trust? You know, that's a big question. And and it has an equally big answer, I think. You know, there's many reasons people hire individuals. I think at Validus we're very lucky that we are small and that we don't have the kind of scale to deal with. You know, if you hire 1,000 people, a couple of them aren't going to be, you know, up to scratch, right? And you know that, right? You've been in this game long enough to see that, right, with your own eyes. And I think when you have a smaller team, and you know, during that hiring process, you can be very, I won't say picky, but you know, you definitely know what you're looking for, and you can spend the time with candidates to really make sure that they are special, right, and that they are the people that you want to be working with.
Yeah, that's good.
I'd say that, sorry, I was going to say the second part of the answer that I was going to give about developing software products at the moment is like using managed services, right? So from a cloud perspective, so, you know, sometimes you may be able to build better than the managed service, like that can fit your needs. And, you know, sometimes there is no managed service. And I think, you know, for us at Validus, that's where, you know, our RiskView product comes into its own. There's not much like it on the market. Therefore, our clients come to us for that capability, right? There's no standard
specific niche.
Exactly,
you
right.
know,
And
like
that's
what
what
the timing is right. The timing is right here to do this in this particular area because we can take the lead, as it were.
Yeah, and you know, I think we've done that with RiskView, and that's our kind of core competency, right? And where I see a lot of kind of fintech startups get trapped, or where they spend a lot of their time is kind of reinventing the wheel or trying to host this stuff themselves, right? So a good example of this would be like a managed Kubernetes cluster, right? To me. So I've had experience like trying that out before, and, you know, building out a kind of monitoring framework over the top of that. And it's hard work, number one, to do that. It's a very niche set of skills. So when you need to hire people, it's very difficult to do. And then thirdly, you also have to manage that as well. So when that goes wrong, you're the guy picking up the, you know, the pieces, right? And ultimately, do our clients care that we run a self-managed Kubernetes cluster? Not in the slightest, right?
They want your expertise. They don't really care how the expertise comes.
Yeah,
you know,
and I think
they're buying the brand, as it were, as opposed to the machinery.
Yeah, and you know, you have to be pragmatic about it. You know, some stuff that we do in-house, you could argue you could buy in, but actually we know that we can do a better job of it. And therefore that's why we build it in-house. And I think it's definitely there's a fine line, right? And getting it right is not always easy. But it's one of the things that I think more leaders need to consider. I think, you know, it's often, like I kind of said, it's easy to get wrapped up in the sexy tech, right? And what, you know, you want to do your own Kubernetes cluster because so-and-so's doing it at, you know, this other company. But
I think it's really interesting what you said there, because don't take this in the wrong way, but you're making software development sound really interesting. You know, usually, you know, it has this kind of ones and O's and typing code, and, you know, we build these things and then we develop them and test them and then they go out. But
we do that.
The way you're presenting it is well, the basics of it, but the way you're presenting it, obviously, to someone who wants to get into computer pros, you know, graduates listening to this, it is about the timing, it is about the strategy, it is about the vision, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's kind of two parts to it. I think, you know, one is the vision, and, you know, having an idea of where you want something to be, you know, at one level. And I think, you know, at Validus we have a great idea of what that looks like, both from a product perspective, but also on the tech side. Now I think, you know, we're starting to really understand, okay, this is what the future is going to look like, this is the set of standards we're going to we're going to abide by. That's one part of it. The kind of boring quote unquote part that you're kind of talking about, the kind of build stuff.
No
to
offense
test it.
to all the software developers out there that just switched off the podcast.
But from that perspective, if I'm looking at it as a whole, I think where some leaders really fall down is they don't understand the realities of the boring stuff, right? So I often think that one of my strengths personally is that I've kind of walked the walk as an engineer, right? I've done that kind of role in my in my past, and that gives you an insight into what's realistic as well, right? And I think that a lot of and this isn't to slang tech leaders at all, right? Because a lot of them do amazing jobs, but I have seen it where people come with big broad visions and it sounds really good, and the stark reality could be that actually the money isn't there, right, to do those things, or the people aren't there, the talent pool isn't there. So I think you have to kind of base these big visions in a kind of bit of reality
real
as
world
well.
environment.
And for me, that's definitely something that we have to wrestle with at Validus, right? There's only a certain number of people that we have to do the work, and we have to say yes to some stuff and no to other stuff. And the vision of what we have on the tech and a product side is definitely driven by all of these factors together. So whilst it might seem sexy on the top, all the stuff that's bubbling
don't forget about the machinery underneath. So.
And you can't have the sexy vision without doing the fundamentals correct, right? And I think that when I came in, some of those fundamentals weren't there. I would honestly say some of them still aren't there, right? They're still a work in progress, but I think having that strong base is what can set you up to do all of these sexy, cool things down the line, the blockchain, the machine learning, etc., etc. But I'm glad you find it attractive.
I'm well up for it now. Retrain. we need more software developers, don't we? So my last point is kind of coming around to obviously the market that Validus supplies to, which obviously the traders, the financial markets. I find it quite interesting that post-COVID, obviously since 2008, that industry has obviously gone through quite a kind of dark times. Since the credit crunch, etc. But obviously that almost that era is now forgotten, and now we're into this pharmaceutical, healthcare, and government era. But what I find quite interesting is obviously your products that you're developing. You talked about RiskView there. How do you think that COVID will and has changed the financial markets, the trading industry?
Yeah, interesting one. God, there's a lot of different answers to this question to give.
Well,
how
can kind of innovative technology, how is that being integrated into what's happening?
Yeah, so I guess kind of the first place to start maybe is on the kind of culture of finance organizations, right? So when I was working at JP Morgan, you could work from home, which was amazing, but there was a kind of, I think, a heavy expectation that you were in an office, right? And I think that definitely post-COVID, that culture across different finance firms, it's very interesting. The variance in opinion is changing, and I think that as a whole will definitely change the kind of underlying culture of these organizations. I think long gone are going to be the days where you have people sitting at their desk because their boss is sitting at their desk, for example. That kind of culture, that kind of weird culture that presented itself because of that. And so I think off the back of people working from home at the moment, I think there's going to be an expectation that people can do that either all of the time or some of the time, and that's going to create its own challenges post-COVID. I think for organizations, I think the ones that are accommodating are the ones that are really going to be successful. I think the ones that don't do that are going to suffer some type of bleed out from the people in their organizations. And I think that on top of that, office space is going to become cheaper in the short term, I think, to attract companies back in. So what does that mean for the finance industry? Obviously, some of these companies that do office management are going to be unfavorable, I guess.
Because property has been such a good investment, hasn't it? And now it's not such a good investment.
So I think the smart companies there again, won't get caught in that trap. I think buying office space now, to me, like personally, you know, if I was at the top of the helm, would be a crazy idea, right? You know, but if it's cheap, you know, sometimes people like cheap, so you know, they might see that,
or it's going to go up. So
yeah, and then, you know, in the medium to long term, as any business, you know, they'll just tweak the rate up and up and up, and we'll be caught in the same trap again. I think that you know, on the point of culture, I think that companies that have strong company cultures and they employ as such will not feel the burn of not going back to an office. You know, let's take one example of, you know, you want to have people in your organization that are professional. Like, no one ever became a professional like standing around the water cooler, right? That's something that you do miss out on, those conversations, but it's a value, right, that you hold every day, right? So it's your way of doing your job, right? So I think what will happen with company cultures is it will just be a product of the people that they hire, rather than, you know, everyone's in a central office and therefore they have a culture of, you know, sitting at your desk from 8 till 6 because that's what your boss does, right? For example, and that becomes kind of the way of being, right? So yeah, it's definitely, from that perspective, it's interesting. I think teams that were created during COVID or have scaled up in COVID will become even stronger as well. And I truly believe that. And, you know, I guess I've kind of seen glimpses of it in the last year. So, you know, if you can make your company work in this time, they'll work in any time, right? Like, you know, there's the underlying stresses of having a pandemic going on, right? So people are not, you know, their usual self, but they're also, you know, when they do go back into an office, hopefully, right, in the kind of sense that there'll be people to people interaction, they should thrive, right? They should have more ways to collaborate with each other in a more kind of easier to access way. And I think that also some of the processes off the back of it, you know, that cloud computing, all of these kind of decentralized tools gives you a lot more power kind of post COVID as well. So.
Yeah, I think it's for me, I think it's about the culture. It's about, you know, how things will change, and I think that links into obviously how the talent landscape will change, because I think, like, going back to what you said, people will be looking for slightly different people, you know, maybe more self-motivated people they feel they can collaborate with easier.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? And in terms of, you know, what people should have always been looking for, you know, they should have always been looking for those people anyway. And I think that, you know, sometimes it's easy to fall into the recruitment trap of, I need someone and I need them in Q1, and like, you know, even if they're not exactly right, I've got to take them because of X, Y, Z, right? You know, we've got a project to deliver. And I think that as long as you kind of stick to your, you know, your principles and your values as an organization and hire the right people, you can wait a month, right? Like, you know, it's not the end of the world. Because ultimately, you know, if you employ someone who holds values that are very different to your own as an organization, they are going to leave, right? You know, so it's a zero-sum game overall if you think like that. So it's yeah.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, it's been great to speak to you today, Ross. Really enjoyed that conversation, and yeah, you've made software development sexy today, so well done. You know?
It always has been. It always has been.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ross.
Cool. Thanks.
And it's really great to speak to you, and have a great day. So thank you.
Will do. Thank you very much. Catch you later.